So we're doing Parshas Korach. Right, so it begins in a very funny way. On 8:20, it begins Vayikach Korach ben Yitzhar ben Kahas ben Levi. So first thing it does is says Korach took. First thing, we don't even know who Korach is, but what did he take? Right? In other words, you don't usually introduce a person in such a way that he took something, especially past tense. Right? And then why did they introduce him in such a funny way also with telling you his father, right? It says Ben Yitzhar, that's his father, Ben Kahas, that's his grandfather, Ben Levi, that's his great-grandfather. What do they tell you all of that for? Usually when you do, you introduce someone as Korach Ben Yitzhar, right? You have the man's name and his father's name. Then you're going to his grandfather, his great-grandfather. And then who else is with him? Dasan and Aviram, B'nai Elihav. So Dasan and Aviram, the children of Elihav. Who are Dasan and Aviram? Well, we meet these guys a few times. They're troublemakers. They're known as troublemakers. They're these two men who seem to be very knowledgeable, elders, right? Men who carry a respect, but they're always sort of in the gray area of life. They're like always starting up with people. They're always trying the easy way. They're always want to get a lot of respect from people that they might not deserve. And they're rebels. Right, so now they teamed up with Korach, Va'on ben Peles, and a fellow named On, right, from Ruvain. So this is so. What does that mean? They took. So Rashi asks the same question. What does it mean that he took? So he says Lakach es asmo l'ser achad. He took himself and separated himself from everybody else. In other words, you have all the Jewish people, and they're all listening to Moshe and Aaron. Right? How did Moshe and Aaron become the leaders? They weren't elected. God chose them. Right? So along comes Korach, and he says, okay, you guys want to be over there. It's me against you. Me against all the Jewish people. I don't believe that Moshe and Aaron should be in charge. I mean, as we're going to see, he attacks Moshe and Aaron because he said, what's going on? Moshe has to be the king of the Jews, and then he appoints his brother as the high priest. Like, this is, nepotism. This is not right. And he said, how can you, everybody, all of the authority goes to you too? So he decides that he doesn't think it's right. And he has a whole argument that every Jew could be, you don't need to have anyone in charge. He believed in no government and in no leadership. Everybody can be his own person. Everyone can decide for himself. It's anarchy. Right? I don't need a leader. I'm a responsible adult. Right? So he goes and he says, all of the Jewish people are holy. What do I need you for? Like, what do I need Aaron Cohen to be the chief Cohen? I don't need a chief Cohen. Everybody's holy. But what he's really saying is, I want to be it. He's come up with this concept, but he doesn't really want it. He doesn't want that everybody should have it. He wants it, right? But that's the story he tells. We'll see as we go on. So it says, "Vayikumu lifnei Moshe v'anashim v'bnei Yisrael chamishim v'tayim nase eideh karei amoed ansheshim." So just instead of reading through the whole thing, it says he took 250 men who agreed with him, and they stood up on one side, and all of the Jewish people are on the other side. And he now is accusing Moshe and Aaron. And he says, they gathered together against Moshe and against Aaron and said to them, it is too much for you. Right? This is Korach telling Moshe and Aaron, it's too much. You're taking everything. Right? For the entire assembly, all of them are holy. Everybody's holy. What do we need you for? Hashem is among them. Why do you exalt yourselves? So it says, Moshe heard what he said and fell on his face. Falling on one's face is an extreme reaction to like something that is so absurd and so crazy you don't know how to respond. That's what the Torah uses as expression. Did he literally fall on his face? I don't know. I don't know if that's what they would do. But for us, like, it's like somebody comes up to you and says something that is like, you stole $500 million from me. Like, what? Who are you? What are you talking about? I've never even seen $500 million in my life. How could you say such a thing? It's totally absurd. So here you have Moshe, the most humble of all people in the history of the world, right? Which is a known thing. And he's told by God that you are going to be the leader. And he argues with God that he shouldn't be the leader. And now along comes Korach and says, you see, you grabbed too much for yourself. You wanted to be the leader. You made yourself the leader. You gave anything you didn't want to your brother. It's only you guys. You're total power, right? So this is like, this is an attack that is so absurd. It goes so against who he is that it says that he just fell on the ground. Right? He didn't even know how to answer him. The Medrash tells us a couple of interesting things. The Medrash says that what he actually said to him was he accused him of having an affair with a married woman. That's what he accused Moshe of. In other words, he wanted to destroy Moshe in the eyes of the people. How do you do that? You make an accusation that might be crazy, but people will always say, okay, maybe he didn't do that, but he must have done something. How else can you make a statement like that? There's got to be some truth to it. Right? The newspaper might exaggerate and say that such and such a person did this, but they didn't say it about me. There's a reason they're saying it about him, right? So he knew something would stick. So he makes this accusation. And you don't really see that Moshe fights back. All he does is fall on his face, right? It's so absurd. So why is that? Like, why wouldn't Moshe stand up for himself and say, who are you coming in here and saying this? Like, where do you come from? Everyone already knows, that you're troublemakers. And how do you come in with such an accusation that I had an affair with a married woman? Like, it makes no sense. He doesn't even argue. So I was speaking to someone about it, and he told me a story about one of his friends who's a pulpit rabbi. And his pulpit rabbi, as happens sometimes with pulpit rabbis, being one myself, people will accuse you of things that are absurd. I mean, you stole money. You took money from someone in order to answer a question in a certain way. You married somebody to someone else. You really shouldn't have married them, but you did it for money. These types of things, right? So someone will make an accusation. So it says that this one friend of his, this rabbi, never would respond. Whenever somebody would make an accusation like this, he wouldn't respond. He has every right to respond, to defend his dignity and his honor, but he wouldn't respond. And it says that over the history of his career, he commented that usually within a year or two, come Erev Yom Kippur, the person who made these accusations would come to him and ask him to apologize, because he would see what he did. And he felt that by not responding, he was keeping his dignity, and it was below him to even respond. That was his response. And that by responding, the only thing that would happen is that there'd be a fight. Because he can't prove I did it, and I can't prove I didn't do it, right? How do I prove I didn't have an affair? How do you prove it? You really can't prove it. Someone can prove you had an affair, right? They take a picture of you. But how do you take a non-picture, right? How do you prove you didn't do something, right? So you can't. So all you're going to do is make a fight. People are going to fight. You're going to make a machlokas. Yeah, I believe him. I think the rabbi would never lie. I think the rabbi will always lie. And make a big fight. So he didn't want to do that. And he knew that eventually the truth would come out and people would realize it. That was his point, and that's what it seems that Moshe is doing. Moshe doesn't really stand up for himself. We see shortly that God stands up for Moshe. Right? God says, this can't go on. We can't allow this. But Moshe himself doesn't seem to. And it says that when he fell on his face, so the Medrash says that what he actually means is that he took his tent, his own tent, and he took it outside of the Jewish people. Like, instead of being among the Jewish people where he lived, he went outside, right? Because I want nothing to do with this. I'm separating myself from them. I'm separating myself from the argument, right? Making a statement. And that was his approach. Now, we understand the whole concept of a machlokas, of a fight among people, especially in a social standing, is a horrible thing. It can destroy a shul, it can destroy an organization, it can destroy a community. And it does, and it has, where you've lost entire communities because people fight with each other. People can, certainly people can go so far, whereas that they're fighting to the point where they hurt each other, physically hurt each other, but that's not as common. Right? It happens, but it's not as common. What is really common is what people will actually go out of their way to hurt each other emotionally and their reputations and things that they say, and entire communities can be destroyed because of it, and it happens over and over. One of the main messages in this parasha is that it's teaching us how destructive fighting is, even when it might be necessary, or even where it might be legitimate. Not necessarily necessary, but legitimate. In other words, it's legitimate for Moshe to defend himself. And if somebody would come and attack me in my position as rabbi, it is extremely appropriate for me to defend myself, because I'm defending my position. Besides me, I'm defending the position of rabbi in the shul. So I'm making a statement. This is, right, you can't attack this position. But there's certainly a reason to say that you don't fight back, because the end result of fighting back is always bad. It's always bad. You might right away say, you can't make a statement like that against the rabbinic position in this shul. And therefore, when you attack me, you're attacking it, and I can stand up. And I will stand up, right? That's, in this case, I'm explaining. I go to stand up. Now, what happens in the end, of course, is that somebody's going to take the other side, and somebody's going to argue, and then people are going to get upset, and then it'll get personal, and you'll end up losing members, and you'll end up destroying the community. And what was once a very nice, wonderful shul fell apart because you had a fight that you were allowed to have, but there's still a very bad effect from it. So even when you're allowed to stand up for yourself, very often we don't want to do that. I know that I have, or people will say, you have no dignity. How can you allow someone to say that? And I'll say, does someone really believe what he's saying? I mean, anybody who knows me knows that can't be true, because usually people pick the one area that is the opposite of who you are. There's a funny rule that way, that when somebody tries to puzzle you, they try to make you, like unkosher, they'll usually attack you in an area that you're very strong and they're weak, and they'll displace it on you. So which won't make sense. Like you say, Moshe, right, took too much honor. Well, what do you mean took too much? God says he's the most humble man in the history of the world. So how could you accuse him of being arrogant? It makes no sense. Accuse him of stealing money. I mean, it doesn't say he was the most honest man in the world. Accuse him of whatever, of sleeping all day. But don't accuse him of that. The Torah tells us right out that he is the humblest person. But you see, that's what Korach attacks him on, and that's who Korach is. Korach was a man who felt that everyone should bow down to him. And same thing with Dasan and Aviram. We meet Dasan and Aviram earlier, and where we meet them is, remember the story where Moshe comes out out of the castle, where the palace of Pharaoh, and he meets two Jews fighting, right? That's Dasan and Aviram. That's them. We're fighting, and they say to Moshe, you're going to kill us like you killed that Egyptian, right? And Moshe says, oh, everybody knows. Of course, everyone knows. These two guys, they talk about this stuff. They were arrogant, and they were trying to knock him down. So even back then, he knows who they are. And so you find them again here. So now it goes on. So it concludes this part here, and it says that Moshe spoke to Korach and to all the people with him, and he said, tomorrow in the morning Hashem will make known the one who is his own and the Holy One. Right? Next, Hashem is going to tell us. Right? I'm not going to answer you. You're below my dignity. God will answer you. He'll show you who he chose. I didn't choose this job. God will show you. So he says, this is what you do. He says, take for yourselves fire pans, right? Like these little shovels that they used to use, and they put spices in it. And then you light it on fire, and you take the incense, and you light the incense in front of God. And whoever God chooses, right, from this group, you'll see that that's the high priest, right? Of course, he's going to pick Aaron, who he already picked, right? So Moses tells them, right, and they go and do it. These guys go and do it. Now, what's interesting is, when it's time to do it, Korach, Dasan, and Aviram don't show up. 250 men show up, because they're blind followers. They're going to do whatever they're told. And they die. All of them die. And only Aaron comes out. Right? It shows you the level of how they followed it. And that's what goes on there. And then Korach comes back again, and he says, okay, they were starting up with Aaron. I think you, Moshe, you stole this position. You made yourself the king. Why should you be the king? I'm going to be the king. Right? So now Korach is fighting with Moshe. Before it was all of these other men were fighting over Aaron. Right? And they saw that they lost. So here, Moshe has an interesting answer, and on 825, he says like this: you're coming and accusing me of these things. If I'm right, if God chose me to be the leader, then you will die a very strange death. That's what he says. You will die a strange death. Why does he have to die a strange death? Why did he just say, if I'm right, you're going to die? Because everybody dies. Everyone dies, right? And Moshe's point was, you're going to die because of what you just said. That's why. Not because you're getting old. Not because your time has come, not because you ate too many hamburgers, because you're going to die because of what you just did. Therefore, your death will be very weird. It's going to be a kind of death that nobody else has ever had. Because if you had if you have a heart attack, all of your followers will say, all right, it was bad timing. Korach had a heart attack and he died, but the cause is still good, and they'll carry on with the cause. Right? He'll be a martyr for the cause. But in reality, Moshe says, no, you're going to die a strange death, and he does. Moshe tells he tells everyone, separate yourself from him. Everyone get away from him. Anyone who's near him, when he dies, is going to die with him. So it said that as we know, the earth opened up and swallowed him and everyone who was around him. They swallowed him into the ground, right? And that was it. And he was killed. So we see from this is a pretty strange death. This is not a normal way of dying. The earth doesn't open up and swallow people and then close back up. But that's what happened to him. And that was the point of what Moshe was saying, that people should realize that this whole story was made up by him in order to try to take over. Now let's just go over the story of it and try to understand it, because the entire essence, right, of why this parsha is here is really over this story, even though there's more things in the parsha, but this is an important story. One of the things, it comes from the ethics of our fathers, Pirkei Avos, which is a Mishnayos, and it's ethical teachings. And I'm sure even if you don't know the book, you know many of the things in the book, because we use it all the time. And one of them says that there are two types of arguments. There is an argument for the sake of heaven, and there's an argument not for the sake of heaven. I'll just tell you outside of the Mishnah, what's an argument for the sake of heaven? It means an argument to find out the truth of the Torah. Like I say, you have to wait, you're going to eat meat, you have to wait 3 hours until you can eat milk. Another guy says, no, 6 hours. You have to wait 6 hours. So we have an argument over what the Torah wants from us. Right? What's the end result would be the right answer for the Torah. So that's an argument for the sake of heaven. This is an argument for the sake of heaven will sustain. In other words, it's not a bad thing. It will be the result will be positive, because you have right. And what was the example? It says Hillel and Shammai, the schools of Hillel and the schools of Shammai. They were always arguing with each other. They didn't have the same opinion on anything, but yet they all got along. There's a Gemara in Yevamos or Gittin. I think it's Yevamos 13. It says that Hillel and Shammai were so different that they had different beliefs according to the Torah that affected divorce. Now you have to realize that if you have divorce, if you make a mistake in the divorce, you can end up with a mamzer. Right? You can end up with a woman getting remarried and she's still married to the first man. And then the children would be a mamzer, which is a horrible thing for a child to be. So that would mean that according to Hillel, Shammai, if you follow Shammai's way, you could have a mamzer. And according to Shammai, if you follow Hillel's way, you could have a mamzer. Right? So you'd have this is a big difference. They would argue about this. But even when they argued about it, it says that they married each other's families, which meant that they didn't make it a personal argument. They didn't fight and kill each other over it. They had a different philosophic opinion about something that pertains to your life very dearly, but they didn't allow it to destroy them. Why? Because it was an argument for the sake of heaven, to get the right answer of how to live our lives. What's an argument? So it says, what's the argument for the sake of heaven? Is Hillel and Shammai. That's Hillel's opinion and Shammai's opinion. What's an argument not for the sake of heaven? It says Korach ve'edaso, Korach and his followers. So the first thing that comes up is, what does it mean, an argument not for the sake of heaven? It means it's an argument, right, for me. In other words, I'm going to have a fight with you. Why? Because I have an ulterior motive. I'll make money, I'll get honor, I'll be in charge, whatever it is. I'm pretending that I'm arguing with you about Torah, but really I'm arguing you about something else, which is how I explain Korach. Korach is saying, what do you mean you have to be in charge? Right? All the Jews are holy. They don't need anybody in charge. You just did it because you want to be the king and you want all the money and you want access to everything. You're the king. Right? We don't need a king. Now, does he really mean that you don't need a king? No. He means I want to be the king. Right? He has an ulterior motive. That's an argument not for the sake of heaven. Right? So it says those arguments will nothing good will come from them. But if you listen to the words closely that I use, the words in the Mishnah of Pirkei Avos, in Ethics of Our Father. It says, an argument for the sake of heaven is Hillel versus Shammai. Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. The school of Hillel versus the school of Shammai. What is an argument not for the sake of heaven is Korach and his followers. But it's not, the statement's not equal. Hillel and Shammai are two opposite opinions, right? So if you would tell me that you have an argument that is for the sake of heaven is Hillel versus Shammai, and you tell me an argument not for the sake of heaven would be Korach versus Moshe. So you'd say an example is Korach and Moshe, but it didn't. It said Korach and his followers. Korach and his followers are one side, not two sides. You hear the difference? Right? So the answer is that Korach and his followers were actually two sides, because it was every man was in it for himself. He wasn't in it to get the truth. He was in it for what he could get. So all 250 of those people, right, had their own opinion. It was Korach versus his others. Korach said, I'm going to be the king. And this guy says, I'm going to be the king. And he says, I'm going to be the king. Each one of them went into it because of what he would get. Right? That was the whole idea behind it, of what he himself would get. So that's why the argument would never sustain. And we have an understanding that today there's no such thing as an argument for the sake of heaven. People just are too small-minded. They don't have the ability to really argue something for the right reason. And what happens is our arguments today, the end result is that we end up destroying each other when we have real arguments, right? So that's why, like, I'm always here in our shul. I'm always trying to bring in people within the structure of Jewish law, within Torah, who are of different paths. Like we look at, I always explain that halacha means Jewish law, but it literally means how one walks. To holech is to walk. Halacha is the walk. How you walk through life, Jewishly. How does a Jewish person walk through life? It tells you walk through life. You don't make a fire on Shabbos. You don't eat chametz on Pesach. That's how you walk through life, right? But I always use the expression that you can walk. When you walk through life, you walk on a road. Right? The road is Jewish law. But on that road are many paths. There's a path on the left, a path on the right, path in the middle, paths all over. You can go any path you want. As long as you're on that road, you're fine. That as long as you follow basic, Jewish ideas and you're following the Torah, then if you want to be, say, you have to wait 3 hours after you eat meat before you eat milk, or you want to say you want to wait 6 hours after you eat meat before you eat milk, fine. They both can be true. They both can be right. They're different approaches to the same thing. So I always try to teach here people that there are many approaches to do things. We can have Hasidim teaching here, and we can have non-Hasidim teaching here, and we can have Zionist Jews teaching here, and we have non-Zionist Jews teaching here, and we have American Jews, and all kinds of teachers from all types of philosophies and backgrounds teaching here, because the people who come here are all different, and I want them to be exposed to all different ways. But the real message that I want is that we all need to be able to respect each other, even if their approach is different than ours. Right? A Hasidic person's approach is very different than my approach, right? But it doesn't make them wrong. It makes them different. If I believe their way was the best way, I would do it their way. I don't believe it's the best way, but it's legitimate. It's good. That for many people in the world, it is the best way. For me, it's not. But does it mean that I shouldn't show people? I shouldn't say it's an alternative? Is it something you should not do? No, I can't say that. I can say, I'm going to expose you to this, and if it does something for you, go with it. And if it doesn't, next week I'll expose you to something else. But everything that you will be exposed to is within the path of Torah. It's on the path. The fact that and I never thought anything extraordinary about that. I always thought it was sort of the way we're supposed to be. But as I'm growing older and I'm seeing that everyone agrees that's how it's supposed to be, but very few people do it. Most institutions that you go to follow one path. And if you don't adhere to that path, you may as well leave. Or if you don't leave, they'll at least not think as well of you. So if you have a place where the institution is Hasidic and you're not Hasidic, you're just not going to fit in fully. Not because there's anything wrong with Hasidim. They're not bad people. They're not closed-minded. It's just in practice, If you have a non-Hasidic place and you are Hasidic and you come in, you also won't fit in 100%, and people might treat you differently. And if you're in a place that's not Zionist oriented and you are very heavily Zionist oriented, you won't fit in very well. And that I find to be very distressing. I find that to be very sad. I understand it, and I know that when it gets down to brass bolts, as they say, when it gets down to the real serious things, everybody's there for each other. But in the meantime, we insult each other and we make each other feel bad, and we do things that are really inappropriate just because you follow the Torah different than me, but even though you follow it in a way that's acceptable. Right? It's not like you're saying Shabbos is on Wednesday. You're saying Shabbos is the same day. I have to follow all the types of work I can't do on Shabbos. Right? I'm not going to tell you that it's on Wednesday. I'm not going to tell you can drive on Shabbos. I'm not going to tell you that you can, cook food on Shabbos. But this one will do it this way. This one will do it that way. This one will dress this way. This one will dress that way. This one will wear a hat. This one won't wear a hat. Like, does it really make a difference? I believe that they make a difference, but they're all acceptable. It's just, if I thought it was the best way, I would do it. I don't think it's the best way, but it's a legitimate way. And that's sad that we don't have that. That the fact that I do this is different. It's unique, and I'm troubled by it, because that's what we're learning from this story of Korach. That if you don't do things like in the way that I want it done, then you're no good. Right? You're different. And the idea of Korach is that they took the idea of fighting, of arguments, of disagreements within a community, and they made it into an enormous thing. And we have to realize that one of the reasons the Torah puts us in here is to teach us how sad that is, how really destructive that is. People died here because of it, and throughout history, people have died once and again and again and again. And we have many cases of it where you have the Tisha B'Av time. We talk about it always. There's a famous Gemara of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, which is it's anybody who comes every year in Tisha B'Av knows the story. But in the Talmud, it tells the story about these two fellows who fought with each other, and they're both wealthy inhabitants of Jerusalem, right, during the time of the temple. And it says that one of them was throwing a party, and the other one was his enemy. Like, they didn't get along. So he tells his assistant, who to invite. He's a wealthy man, so they don't have mail. So he tells his assistant, here's all the invitations, here's the list, go deliver them. He goes and delivers them. He delivers one to the guy's enemy. Right? There's Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. Bar Kamsa is the guy with the party, and Kamsa is the guy who's the enemy. And the guy, by mistake, delivers one to his enemy. So his enemy thinks he's trying to make up with me, so I'm going to go to the party. I'm going to be big of me. I'm going to go to the party. When in reality, it was a mistake. So all of the dignitaries and all of the rabbis come to the party, right? And in comes this guy, and the owner of the house says, "Who are you? What are you doing here? Get out of here. You're not welcome in my house. Who let you in?" And he says, "You invited me. Here's the invitation." "Well, it's a mistake. Get out of here." The man says, "Listen, don't humiliate me in front of everybody. The whole city is here. I'll pay for my meal, so you shouldn't have to, so you won't take a loss on me." He says, "No, I can't stand having you here." He says, "Look, I'll pay for half of the party. The whole party, I'll pay for half of it. Just let me stay. Don't humiliate me." He says, "No." He says, "I'll pay for the whole party. Just let me stay." He says, "No." And he throws him out. Right? And now that we think that's the end of the story, right? Horrible, right? First thing is, the rabbis were all there, and they didn't stand up for the guy. They didn't go to the owner and say, "Listen, what's wrong with you? Take it easy. Why do you humiliate him? I know that whatever it is he did to you, in your mind, it was a terrible thing. Okay, it was a terrible thing. Let's say you're right. But still, you can't do this to him." They didn't do anything. No one said anything. So that's the end of the story. But the story actually continues. That this fellow was so upset, they decided, "I'm going to get him back." And he goes to the Roman emperor. And he says to him, "The Jews in Jerusalem are rebelling against you. They're rebelling." And he says, "And I'll prove it to you. If you take a sacrifice and offer it, and a non-Jew is allowed to offer a sacrifice, a specific type of sacrifice. If you take the sacrifice and you want to offer it in the temple, you're allowed to, right?" Yeah. He said, "They won't accept it. You'll see, they're rebelling against you." So the Roman emperor says, "Okay." He takes a cow, a beautiful cow. He gives it to the guy. Now, as the guy is delivering it to Jerusalem, he scratches the eyelid of the cow. Now, you can't see the scratch when the eyes are open, right? It's on his eyelid. But part of the rule is that you can't offer a sacrifice that has a flaw. And a scratch on the eyelid until it heals is a flaw. So he comes back and he says, we have to, the Roman Empire wants me to give you the sacrifice to offer. Now the rabbis see the sacrifice and they got a problem because it's got a scratch on its eyelid and they can't offer it. But if they don't offer it, they know that this guy went and told the emperor that we're rebelling against him. But if we offer it, we're going against the word of God. It says you can't offer this. What do we do? We're in a dilemma. So they get the rabbis together and they say, well, you know what we'll do? Let's kill the messenger. We'll kill the guy. Then he can't go back and tell him that we didn't offer the sacrifice. By the time the king finds out, the emperor finds out, right, we'll come up with a story. So one guy gets up and says, no, you can't do that. No, where does it say that you can kill somebody because they want to offer a sacrifice that's not kosher? So they said, okay, what are we going to do now? So they said, I know what we'll do. Let's offer it anyways. Let's do it anyways. I mean, they're going to save the lives of all the Jews. I mean, the Roman Empire will kill us all. So let's offer the sacrifice, even with a scratch. So the same guy gets up and says, no, you can't do that. Well, you can't offer a sacrifice with a scratch because people will say that you're allowed to offer a sacrifice with a scratch, right? So you can't do that. So then they said, what are we going to do? And they did nothing. And the guy went back and told the emperor. The emperor came in and destroyed the city of Jerusalem, and the whole temple was destroyed. So over this story. So there are many parts of the story to comment on, but just in light of our discussion today, here it was that these two men were in a fight with each other, right? And it escalated to such a point that one of them rationalized that it was worthy to destroy the entire Jewish civilization. Everybody, millions of people were killed. The temple was destroyed. Today, in 2014, we're still feeling the effect of this because these two guys had a fight because he made him leave a party. Right? The first guy shouldn't have made him leave the party, and the second guy certainly shouldn't have done what he did. Right? There's also what the rabbis didn't necessarily do what they were supposed to do either. But in every case, we see how the hatred, the fighting between them caused this destruction. That's what Korach caused. That's what he did. Korach wanted to make a fight. He split himself between himself and others. Right? That's what he did. And that's a serious thing, right? That he caused. We see that whenever there's this type of fighting, that it's the end is always bad. So therefore, as I started in the beginning, when I talked about the idea of how Moshe just fell on his face, he didn't fight back, even though he could fight back, right? If I'm sitting in this room and one of you says, I'm not going to listen to you anymore, I know you're really a thief, right? And I can prove it, and you run out. And I have every right to defend myself, right? To say it's not true and show you why it's not true. But Moshe says, no, you're going to lose. If you start a fight, even for the right reason, fighting is going to cause trouble. Going to make a fire in the community, it'll be destroyed. And that's what we see here. That's why I consider it so important to present other ways of doing things, that people should tolerate each other. We should get along with. When I talk about that a community should get along with each other, all I'm really talking about is tolerate. Tolerate is not a very strong emotion. All it means is I don't fight with you. Right? You want to come into my shul and have a big long beard? Okay. I'll tolerate you. I'll be nice to you. I'll treat you with respect. You're welcome here. I'm not going to do it, right? But you're welcome here. That's all I ask, and that's what the Torah is asking. It doesn't say that if a guy comes in with a long beard, you have to all grow a long beard. No such thing. But you have to treat the guy with respect. That's the way he wants to do it. You can think he's cuckoo because of it, but that's the way he wants to do it. And in my case, lots of times people think that the rabbi just isn't passionate. He doesn't care. I hear that a lot from people. You let this guy do this and this guy do this and this one. It's just you don't care. You let them do what they want. I said, sure I care. You're looking at the wrong rule. You're saying I should make uniformity. That everybody, you want to lead services in my show, you have to wear a hat. You want to lead services in my shul, you have to wear socks. You can't go up with sandals without socks to lead the services. So I can make all these rules, and some of the rules you have to make. It's a requirement. But I'm not going to make a rule that's going to cause people to feel unwelcome or unhappy within the shul if they're not doing anything, it's halachically wrong. Because you shouldn't be fighting. That's the goal. My goal isn't uniformity. My goal is not to fight. And it's easy to fight. Just look around you. It happens everywhere. You have fights that destroy. We've even had here where there have been issues that came up that I had to do something, and the person responded poorly, and they made noise, and there was a fight in the shul like that. And it took a second. You had two sides. And it's silly, because there was no reason for it, and there is no reason for it. And that's what we learned from Korach. A couple of other interesting things. If you look at, when I told you how Moshe tells Korach, people around Korach, move away from him, because when he goes, not only is he going to go, but his neighbors are going to go with him. So get away from him. So you'll notice that when the people died, you had all of him, Korach and his family and all of his followers died. They all got swallowed by the earth. But the one name that you'll notice is missing, that was in the beginning, I commented on it, was On ben Peles. First I said there was Korach, and there was Datsan and Aviram, and there was 250 men, and there was a guy named On ben Peles. He was one of his followers, who was like one of the leaders of the revolution against Moshe and Aaron. But you see, he's not killed. He doesn't get killed. Why not? So the Medrash has an amazing story, and it tells us the following. It says, On comes home from a day of the revolution, and his wife says, "So, On, how's things going?" And he says, "Listen, I'm with Korach, and we're going to have a revolution against Moshe, and we're going to and you know what's going to happen? You're going to be no more leader. We're going to all take care of ourselves. Life's going to be so much better." So his wife says to him, "On, you're an idiot. Korach doesn't want everybody to be the same. Korach wants to be the king. He's lying to you. It's a revolution. He's got an ulterior motive. How do you fall for such silly things?" So he says, "No, it's not true." So she says, "It is true." And he says, "Well, I don't care what you say. I'm listening to Korach. He means well, and he's going to make us a better life for us." And so she says, "Sure, whatever you say." The next day, the men come to bring him back so they can do the last part of the fight, right? And Moshe says, "You come, you're going to die," right? And all the men come and they say, "Okay, On, come on, we're going to go. It's time to act," right? And what happened is that On's wife knew they were going to come, so she went outside her house with her hair uncovered, like she wasn't dressed properly. So the men, even though they were rebelling, they weren't rebelling against Judaism. They wouldn't come near the house because his wife wasn't dressed properly. They didn't want to embarrass her. So they couldn't come close enough to get him. And she knew this, right? She did it on purpose. So when they came to get him, they couldn't get him, right? And off they went, and they all died. He didn't die. But there's a little bit more to it, because the Medrash compares his wife to Korach's wife. And his wife was a smart person who knew that there's no good in fighting. It's not going to work. Korach's wife, on the other hand, the Medrash says, he would come home and she'd say to him, "Korach, you're a great man. You have amazing potential. And this Moshe, he's holding you down. Moshe's the man. Right? He's pushing you down. He's holding you back. He's like a warlord, this Moshe. You got to get rid of him. He's corrupt. He's terrible. You got to be in charge. But what's wrong with you? I married you because I knew you'd be the great leader, and now you let this other guy be a leader." So she's pushing him and pushing him and pushing him for her needs, even if she's wrong. Right? So here you have the story of two wives, the Medrash tells us. Right? You have one wife, right, it says, whose wisdom built the house. That's that quote from King Solomon. That because she was wise and understood fighting is never going to lead us anywhere. Right? You think that Korach is well-meaning and he's doing this for the greater good. He's not. He's doing it to line his pocket. He's doing it to be the king himself. And you're not, and she tells her husband, "You're not the king now, and you're not going to be the king under Korach. So what good is it for you to do this?" Right? That's what she tells. In other words, she's a wise woman. She saves his life. Right? Korach's wife, on the other hand, she's manipulating her husband to do what she wants him to do for her. She wants to be the wife of the king. She wants to be rich. She wants everything that she sees that she can get. So she gets her husband and she pushes him. "What's wrong with you? You let him do that to you? You let him talk to you that way? How do you let him do that? You go there and stand up for yourself." Right? And he listens to her. Right? And you see the end of the two men. Right? And this really shows you, this is a very famous Dvar Torah, that it shows you the power of the woman within the household. The woman's power within the household is enormous. We can never underestimate it, because we say all the time, when somebody starts getting interested in Torah and Jewish life, and they start coming here, if it's a woman who comes, right, and she's married and her husband has little interest, so you don't want to push people along or help people move along by themselves and then their spouse isn't, because it makes trouble. But chances are, if it's a woman who comes, that everything will work out. Now, that doesn't mean that you can go and do it. But why is it? Because the woman creates the atmosphere in the house. And as she creates this, the man will go along with it. But if it's the man who comes and the woman's not interested, it usually fails. Because the woman creates the atmosphere in the house. And as she creates an atmosphere that my husband's making me nuts, I want to go to the movies on Saturday afternoon and he's going to the synagogue, right? And it won't work. The marriage will fall apart immediately. Because unless she gets interested, because the Talmud has an interesting expression. It tells a story about one of the great rabbis, and he was asked to become the head of the Sanhedrin, of the great court, and he says, "Well, I have to go ask my wife." So they come to him, they ask him, right? This is almost like a God-appointed position. This is like the position, and it's like they come, they say, "We want you to be president of the United States. You're prime minister candidate." "Well, I don't know. I got to ask my wife." Right, that's what he does. He asks his wife, but he doesn't call her his wife. He calls her his home. He calls her Basi, my house. He doesn't mean a physical house. He means his home. Why does he call her that? So people would say, on a cursory view, like the old-time feminists would say, that's what men look at their wives. In Jewish world, the men are in charge. The women are like household goods. They don't mean anything. But that's not what he's saying at all. He's saying my wife creates my life. Just like my home is my life. I got a place I sleep. I keep my stuff. I grow. I live. I learn. I have my children there. Everything is in my home. My wife is my home. She is that. Right? Without my wife, I have no home. I could have a house. I could have children. I could have everything. I don't have a home without my wife, and I need to consult my wife before I make a decision. That's what he was saying. And that's how it's supposed to be. Right? A woman carries an enormous amount of power, even if it appears to the public that that's not the case. Because in the real world, that is how it works. It is. You just have to think back on your lives when your husbands had crazy ideas, and you pushed them to go the other way, and the difference, how you had, and they may never acknowledge that you did it, may never realize that you did it, but you did it. You thought it, and we all know cases where you have a woman who is, something off with her, and she's only interested in money, or she's only interested in glamour, and how it ruins her family. But you could have a man in the same family who's only interested in how he looks, and his family will still function fine. Why? Because she's the one running the house, not him. That's, in fact, in Jewish law, it talks about it. I was just preparing for a series of classes I'm doing on Jewish women in the summer, and it talks about how, like within the household, it says that when it comes to Torah and Jewish law, it says that what should happen, well, let me preface it. Really what should happen in any disagreement within the household, it should come to a consensus between the husband and the wife. There should be a discussion, and they have a consensus, where one will convince the other, or the other way around, and they come to an agreement. But let's say you don't. You don't have a consensus. So you have to do something. Like whatever decision is, you have to do something. So it says if it has to do with Torah, the type of education the child gets, certain approach to Torah, certain Jewish law, we keep 6 hours, not 3 hours, these types of things. So if you're in a case where you can't have an agreement, then the man's word takes authority. But anything that has to do with the house, including spending money, right? Anything to do with the house, how much money you pay for this, how much you spend on groceries, what you buy, that's totally under the woman's domain. Which means that if there's a disagreement between the man and the woman about buying a car or not buying a car, according to Jewish law, the woman has precedence. Her opinion carries more. If the question is what school should I send my kids to, right, this school or this school, and they've talked and talked and talked and they can't come to an agreement, then the end result is the man's opinion carries it. But if they want to discuss the spirit within the house, how they're going to raise their children, what they're going to do with certain things. Are they going to let, taking a boarder, not taking a boarder? Do we have enough money to pay for this, not pay for that? Are we trying to, instill a certain spirit within our children? What language will we speak to our children in? How are we going to live in certain ways? That's totally the woman's domain. Now, I can't stress enough, that's only after you come to the conclusion that you're not going to be able to come to a consensus. Consensus is very important. But it shows you that Jewish law understands that we can say whatever we want, that the man's in charge. It's not true. The woman really does do that. And I see it in my own life all the time. That's why I always find it so funny when outsiders will say, I'll talk about the Orthodox Jewish woman is like pushed around by her husband and he tells her what to do, and she's like meek and easygoing. And I always say to them, I don't know where you get this idea from. I said, because first thing is, I don't see one role model in original text in our books, the Torah or the Talmud, where the woman did not tell her husband what to do and was always right. Every single time. God tells Abraham, listen to your wife. Whatever she says is true. Right? That's pretty strong. Right? You see, Yitzchak is going to give the blessings to the wrong son. So his wife tells her son, lie to your father. You guys, right? Go and lie to him. Tell him you're the older son. What do you mean? How do you do that? Because she knew better. She was a greater prophet. She knew more. And I look at Jewish women today. I don't see any Jewish women who just do whatever you tell them. I don't know anybody like that. I have more comments and more constructive criticism from the women in the shul than the men, because the women have expressed an opinion. They want to see something. They could be right, they could be wrong, because they may not know Jewish law, but they'll express an opinion. They don't just whatever I say they'll do. Right? Or whatever their husband says they do. It never happens. You just don't see it. Because Judaism says that women need to have strong personalities. They need to have authoritative part of their life. Right? They don't simply just say yes, yes, yes. Men, like women, will say yes when it comes to a Torah rule. If they go to a rabbi with a question, the rabbi says you have to do this, then they have to do that. Right? But in general, where you have different ways of doing things, I've never seen a woman just say, okay, I'll do whatever you say. If I'm afraid you'll punch me in the nose or slap me or something if I don't do what you want, so I'll do it. It just doesn't exist. Such a thing doesn't exist. And this parsha really, that medrash in this parsha really deals with that. Let's see if we have, we don't really have much time, so. It goes into some of the sacrifices it talks about here and a few other areas, but really I think the important point, there's a lot of other very interesting details when it comes to how they prove that Aaron should be in charge and what it means. That we have a story here. I'm not going to be able to explain it, but maybe I'll do one of my talks on Shabbos about it, where it says that they wanted Aaron's job. So it says, Moshe says, okay, every one of you, the heads of the different groups, you come in and bring your staff, your walking stick with you. And we're all going to put it down, all right? And then God will pick which one of you will be the Kohen Gadol, because there'll be a change in your stick tomorrow morning when you come back. So they come back the next day, and their sticks are the same, except Aaron's stick, right, it grew like flowers, and it grew buds and almonds, right? It grew. So first things that you had the flower, and then you also had buds, right? And then you also had finished almonds. In other words, it must have been a stick from an almond tree, but it's dead, right? It's dead. And you also, when you see a tree, it doesn't have blooms, buds, and the finished fruit. It has blooms, and then later it has buds, and then later it has the finished fruit. You don't have all three on the tree at the same time, and that's what this had. So there's a lot of Torah about this, about the fact that Aaron's was picked. That's understandable. God picked Aaron to be the high priest. That was God picked him. So we knew that was going to happen. But why the sticks and why in this way, that we have to discuss when we have some more time. But that's really the story of Korach, and at least what he seems to be saying to me, or a part of it. And we'll talk more.